Hello everyone and welcome back to the NPC Dungeon. Today I'm going back to the first campaign that I ever pulled stories from. This story includes the cast of characters that you've all grown to know and love, I hope at least, and that includes Thane, Harold, Bigsby, Amaros, the Amorous, and Jack. It happened shortly after the one I told about the Kobold Den, and it features a village of little bear people who live in the trees and are definitely not Ewoks. So what happened? Well, the party was to travel to the next city in order to deliver a map that they retrieved at the request of the person who asked them to retrieve it, but they ended up getting lost and knocked off course. They found themselves wandering into a forest full of traps, including the classic 2 hammers swinging down to hit you trap and a giant net scooping everyone up trap. They avoided them, but not without taking significant damage. So significant that they thought it wise to surrender to the crowd of tiny bear people who are again definitely not Ewoks when they surrounded them. The party somehow convinced them they meant no harm, and were able to wander through the village and purchase whatever wares they would like from the merchants. However, before they left, the leader approached them once more and said they had a job for them. A nearby temple of theirs had been overrun by a hideous demon, and they wanted the players to clear it out. But the safest path there was through the trees. The ground in that direction was covered with waves of ants, like an undulating sea of ants. So the players nodded and headed out, sent on a sacred pilgrimage that no one other than these bear creatures had ever been on before. It really was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. They hopped off the side of the platform and climbed through the trees. A giant formed albino gorilla, a Girallon if you're curious, shuffled in the distance. The players wanted nothing more than to avoid it, but they had nowhere to go and were perched precariously on the trees. Maros used a horn that I'd given them early on to summon weaker beasts, and in this way they blew into it and summoned forth a pretty normal looking gorilla. It ran off in the distance and distracted the Girallon, who ran away chasing after it, and so the players continued. But they weren't safe yet. They noticed a strange sourceless movement. It was as if the vines themselves were moving, and they realized that the vines themselves were moving and combat was on. Harold eventually fell from his perch, but used the immovable rod that he found earlier on to save himself. Jack had a ring of jumping that he used to leap past the vines, but only ended up falling deeper and deeper and closer to the forest floor. He ended up shooting up into the sky and plummeting down on top of some of the other players occasionally, or just past them. You can only imagine how fun that was to narrate when this ranger just plummeted right past in front of the eyes of another player, immediately appearing and then disappearing instantaneously out of frame. That was kind of fun, and he and Harold actually ended up being pretty close to one another by this point, and used that to help each other climb, but watched below as the forest floor moved and shivered beneath them, forming into a wave of ants crashing again just beneath them, just out of their reach. And as you might have guessed, it wasn't actually very long until they fell to the ground and had to struggle out of the ants, rush ahead, and actually with everything they had strive to outrun them. Meanwhile, Thane and Amaros, though, weren't having that much better of a time. They had tied themselves together for safety, but it was anything but safe, and with their completely conflicting personalities, Amaros is being much brighter and more cheerful, whereas Thane was sheer doom and gloom incarnate. It made for a pretty fun time, especially when they both ended up being trapped because one of them became ensnared to the vines because they were tied together. Thane had been avoiding using any fire up to now, but in a final moment of desperation, he ignited his flaming axe and sliced at the vines. They watched as the vines shriveled back and the trees caught fire. Luckily, the ants were also caught in the blaze as well, but the players just barely got out. They caught their breath and looked up to see a giant mushroom. This was apparently the temple they were told about, and the demon, just a giant frog. They were already weakened from the fight, but the frog was vicious and had them in its sights. It pounced on them, flung its tongue out, and nearly ate Amaros, but they emerged victorious and got out, even if only barely. I know I can't be the only DM who almost killed their players with a frog. If this has happened to any of you guys, please let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear about it. But anyway, after defeating this demon, it hit them. What happened to the bear creatures, again, not Ewoks, in that fire? They trudged through the ash and dust on their way back to find it completely obscured in rubble. One of my players decided to play the Anakin's betrayal theme from Star Wars because it seemed to fit pretty well as they described their character picking up a tuft of fur and holding it to the sky in desperate sadness. But that's about it for that. That one got pretty interesting and it went in a lot of weird directions, but it's still one of my favorites actually, and I hope you enjoyed it too. It did end up being kind of short, but it had a lot going on in it. Feel free to check out this week's other episode. It's all about generating story and campaign concepts, and be sure to come back next week where I'll talk about my process for making NPC stats and tell a little story about Brynwyn. Thanks for watching, and of course, until next time, let's learn something.